It's time for Fresh Oil with singer-songwriter and pastor Keith Manley, a program designed to minister the gospel of God's grace and to bring fresh oil to the brokenhearted. And now, with today's program, Pastor Keith Manley.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to Tuesday on Fresh Oil. I want to take you into the second part of this week's teaching on the voice that leads you. And if yesterday was about recognizing God's voice, today's program is something that's just as important, and that's learning how to tune out the noise. Because here's the truth. God is speaking, but He's not the only voice speaking. And if you don't learn how to filter what you hear, you end up following the wrong voice, even while believing you're doing the right thing. See, Jesus said in John chapter 10, a stranger they will not follow. Now notice that. He didn't say the stranger wouldn't speak. He just said the sheep are not to follow. That means there will always be other voices. The issue is not the presence of voices. The issue is which one will you follow? Let me say something plainly at the beginning of this program today. Not every voice deserves your attention. We live in a world where everything is talking. Social media is talking. News is talking. Opinions are talking. Fear is talking. Your past is speaking. And your emotions are speaking. Because noise creates confusion. And if you don't become intentional, you'll become overwhelmed. And that confusion leads to wrong decisions. Let me take you a little deeper into this. There are really three primary voices you deal with on a daily basis. First, there is God's voice. It's not loud. Sometimes it's a still, small whisper. But it leads. It always brings peace. It always aligns with the truth. Even when it corrects you, it draws you closer. Secondly, there's your voice, your thoughts, your mind, your reasoning, your emotions. And this voice is not always wrong, but it's not always right either. And then thirdly, there's the enemy's voice. And this voice, my friend, is so subtle. He lies, he distorts, he exaggerates, and he creates fear, pressure, and confusion. Now here's where this becomes critical. It's about discerning. It's not just about hearing, it's about discerning, because all three voices can sound like you. And sometimes what you think is God is actually your emotions. And sometimes what feels logical is actually rooted in fear from the enemy to paralyze you and keep you from doing what God's called you to do. Let me give you a real-life example. You feel something rising up inside of you that says, you better fix this right now. You better say something. You can't let this go. And it feels urgent. It feels strong. It feels justified even. But when you step back and look at it, there's no peace. There's agitation, pressure, and there's heat. That's not God. Because God does not lead through agitation. Let me say that again. God does not lead through agitation or fear. And here's where so many believers get stuck. They're trying to hear God without dealing with the noise. But you can't hear clearly in a noisy environment. Let me give you a picture. If you were trying to tune in to a radio station, perhaps the one you're listening to right now, and there was static, you wouldn't assume that the station just stopped broadcasting. You would adjust the dial. The signal is still there. The problem is interference. And that is exactly what happens spiritually. God is speaking, but there's interference. And that interference is what we call noise. And here is the key, my friend. If you want to hear God clearly, you must become intentional about reducing the noise. This is not accidental. It's not going to happen automatically. It's a choice we make because we live in a generation that is addicted to noise. We wake up to noise. We even go to sleep with noise. I have a noise machine that makes a white noise every night when I go to sleep. We fill every quiet moment with something. Music, podcasts, scrolling or notifications on our phone, and then we wonder why we struggle to hear God. It's not because God is not speaking. It's because we've not created space for Him and for us to listen. Let me take you into Scripture for a moment. The Bible says this in Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." That word still is powerful. It means to cease striving, to quiet oneself, to let everything settle. Because God is not found in chaos, my friend. He's recognized in the stillness, in the quiet. Let me say something that may challenge you a little bit. If your life is constantly loud, your spirit will become dull. Not dead, but dull. And when the spirit is dull, you lose sensitivity. Things God is saying, you don't pick up. Promptings that He's giving, you sometimes miss it. Not because He didn't speak, but because you were too full of noise to hear. Now, let me bring this into a practical place. If you want to tune out the noise, you have to guard what you allow in. What you listen to matters, my friend. What you watch on television, it matters. What you dwell on with your thoughts, it matters. Because everything you take in affects your sensitivity. Now, let me say it this way. If you're constantly feeding on fear, you'll struggle to hear truth. If you're constantly feeding on negativity around the wrong people, you'll struggle to hear truth. If you're constantly feeding on opinions, you'll struggle to hear God. And this is why you have to become selective. Not everything deserves access to your mind. Not everything deserves access into your spirit. There's some voices you don't analyze, you just reject them. Jesus said, "A stranger they will not follow." And this means when the sheep hear a voice that's not the shepherd, they don't sit there and debate it. I have been to Israel 32 times, I believe. And I've been there where the shepherds, there will be a couple shepherds and different sheep, and one shepherd will call his sheep, and they follow him. They just take off following him, not the other shepherd. See, they don't try to figure it out. They don't they don't sit here and go, "Wow, do I follow him?" No. They follow their shepherd because they know his voice. So when you hear the voice that's not the voice of God, reject it. And some of you need to hear that today, because you don't need to overanalyze every thought. Some thoughts, you just simply reject it. You just say, "That's not God. That doesn't align with truth. I'm not receiving that." And you just move on. I believe we shouldn't be listening to every teaching, because some teachings are not right. And when you hear something and it troubles your spirit and something inside you says that's not right, friend, God's truth brings peace. Let me say this really clearly today. What you entertain, you empower. If you entertain fear, guess what? Fear will grow in your life. If you entertain lies, lies gain influence. But if you reject what is not from God, you protect your peace. The book of Colossians tells us to let peace rule in our hearts. I have found one of the greatest ways to know if I am in the will of God is to follow peace. Now let me take you one step deeper. Tuning out the noise is not just about removing things, it's about replacing them. You can't live empty. If you remove noise, you have to fill that space with truth. You say, "Keith, how do you do that?" Well, number one, take time in the Word. Spend a few moments every day, even if you begin with 10 to 15 minutes, reading the Proverbs of the day, reading a part of the Gospel of John. However you begin, however small it might seem, take time in the Word, and then take time for prayer. I don't mean just talking to God, giving Him your wish list. I mean talking to God and being still and listening to Him. Have time in worship. Have time in stillness where you just wait before the Lord. Be still and know that I am God. That's what He tells us. Because What you fill your life with determines what you become sensitive to. And the more time you spend in God's presence, the more His voice becomes dominant in your life. And here is what begins to happen. The noise doesn't disappear completely, but it loses its influence. It becomes background, and God's voice becomes the foreground. The more time we meditate on His Word, the more time we spend in prayer, the more we hear His voice. Let me give you one more illustration today. Have you ever been in a room where there is a constant sound like a fan or an air conditioner? And at first, you notice it. But over time, you just stop hearing it. I had a friend that lived by a train track. And I sat in his house and I said, wow, that's terrible. He says, what? The noise of that train. He says, I don't even hear it anymore. Why is that? Because their focus shifts. And this is what happens spiritually. When your focus is on God, other voices begin to fade. Oh, they're still there, but they no longer control you. Now, let me bring this home today for a close. If you're going to be led by God, you have to learn His voice above every other voice, more than opinions. It doesn't matter to me what people think. So many times we live our lives based on people's opinions and what they think of us, but friend, you'll be a mess if that's what you do. If you're going to be led by God, you have to learn to value His voice above every other voice, more than opinions, more than emotions, more than fear. Because whatever voice you value the most will be the one you follow. So today, this is not just about hearing better. This is about choosing better, friend. Choosing what you listen to. Choosing what you allow in your life and in your heart and your mind. Choosing what you reject. Because clarity is not accidental. Clarity is something that's cultivated. Let me ask you something today. What voices have you been listening to more than God? Is it fear? Is it pressure? Is it other people's opinions? Or is it your own thoughts? Because whatever voice is loudest in your life, it'll end up shaping your direction. Let me leave you with one more picture today, because this will help you carry this into your everyday life. Years ago, I heard an illustration that stayed with me, and it fits exactly what we're talking about today. A man bought a brand new car, and the first few days he drove it, he noticed everything about it, every sound, every vibration, every little noise. If something rattled, he heard it. If something shifted, he noticed it. Why? Because it was new, and he was paying attention. But after a few months, he didn't notice those things anymore, not because the car stopped making noise, but because he got used to it. And that's exactly what happens spiritually. If you're not careful, you can get so used to noise that you stop recognizing it as noise. Fear becomes normal. Pressure becomes normal. Confusion can become normal. And once that happens, friend, you don't even question it anymore. You just live with it. But here's the problem. When noise becomes normal, clarity becomes rare. And God never intended for you to live in confusion. Let me say something strong right here. You were not created to be led by pressure. You were created to be led by peace. I want to close with this verse. Romans tells us to be spiritually minded is life and peace. So if your life is constantly filled with confusion, constant pressure, constant mental noise, that's a signal, not of failure, but of misalignment. It means something has become too loud. And here's where you take authority over this in your life. You make a decision. I'm not going to let every noise speak into my spirit. I'm not going to let fear dominate my thinking. And I'm not going to let noise drown out the voice of God. We're talking about hearing the voice of God this week on Fresh Oil. Thank you so much for tuning in today, friend. I'm Keith Manley. Join me again tomorrow at this same time. Walk in grace. He loves you.
Thanks for joining us today for Fresh Oil with Pastor Keith Manley. Fresh Oil is an outreach of Grace Family Church in Rockford, Illinois, and can be heard each weekday at this same time. You can reach us online at weneedgod.com. Until next time, remember, God's love for you is unconditional, and He makes His mercies new every morning.